Okay, I do intend on making a best of version of this video, but I'd rather give regular show specials their own videos first, as I think the majority of this show's best episodes are specials. And honestly, the Terror Tales of the Park series might be one of my favorite Halloween series from any show. And it's clear this series was inspired by Treehouse of Horror, and very much like that series, I think Terror Tales does a good job balancing horror and comedy aspects in ways that are very entertaining. Plus, what better way to celebrate Halloween than with some good old-fashioned ghost stories? If that doesn't make the few adults that watch my channel feel like a kid again, I don't know what will. So let's get started. For the record, I like all of these episodes. I think all of them are entertaining and have moments that I remember fondly, as well as all worth watching for Halloween. And this one is kind of unique in its own way because while the other episodes stick to 3 segments, this one has 4. And what's also different about this one is, usually every story is told by the character it's focusing on, which I really enjoy because I think it gives the episodes less creative restrictions, and it allows them to have a little more fun with their segments. But here, all the stories are told by the same character, a fortune-telling machine called Racky that checks every single cliche. I mean, yeah, they're making fun of these cliches, but I don't know, it's clear there were times where they just said, screw it.
You wish to hang out with your lady, then you well, I can't think of anything that rhymes with lady, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start.
But to their credit, I do like the way they use some of these cliches to set up the twist ending. But the segments here feel a bit more generic. Mr. Bossman, I mean, it's really hard for me not to watch this and not compare it to Night of the Living Dummy from Goosebumps. Especially since I'm pretty sure this episode is a parody of Night of the Living Dummy. Either that or a rehash of Creepy Doll, but either way, it feels like I've seen a lot of the things that this segment's done before. So sometimes it's hard to tell if it's just making a reference or ripping something off.
This is my house now!
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
I mean, it's entertaining enough, but it feels like it's trying to be more funny than scary, yet the segment itself is built to be more scary, so I think that holds it back a bit. Where Pops, while I do think it's memorable, I mean, it's hard to forget Pops being turned into a werewolf, I don't think I would call it too interesting either. I mean, most of it takes place in a courtroom, and because this episode has 4 segments, by default, each segment has to be shorter than usual. So it feels like this episode just never leaves the ground. Like, everything is just build up, and then suddenly it's over. And one reason I think it feels like that is because, I guess in order to make up for the shorter runtime, the characters just willingly go along with the plots.
You're saying the real killer attacked you in the bathroom, turned you into a werewolf, tore a hole in the wall, and then escaped, leaving you behind to take the rap?
That actually makes a lot of sense. But my gut's telling me to have fun with this one. Let's stick with guilty and see how it pans out.
And yet, self-aware or not, being that bland about it kinda makes the segment feel all duct-taped together. It's not exactly bad, it's just not really anything special compared to the other segments. Also, was anyone else expecting Who Let the Dogs Out to be the song playing at the end? I mean, Werewolves of London is a much better choice, but I don't know, I guess the 90s kid in me really thought they'd go there. Going Up is the only segment from the series that focuses solely on High Five Ghost, and it's a pretty straightforward ghost story. Which obviously they have a good excuse for putting 5s into, but it just doesn't seem that memorable or interesting compared to the rest of them. It's just your typical he was dead all along story.
5s, the elevator's broken? The repairman died 40 years ago.
What?
Yeah, I've been taking the stairs.
But it certainly got its moments. I mean, I admit I genuinely fear being trapped in an elevator, so I definitely relate to 5s during this whole segment.
I don't want to be trapped in here. Not like this. I never paid off my student loans. I don't want to burden my family.
Man, it's like you're bringing my worst nightmares to life. And the best one, as is custom with most episodes on this list, is its last segment, Chocolatude. Even though it still feels a bit crammed together, it's still a decent little parody of Hansel and Gretel, and it works in a fun little twist on wanting to be popular.
Whoa, did that kid really turn into chocolate? That's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
But there's not really much to say about this one either, because a lot of what this segment does well, being a good parody, having decent humor, and even coming up with a satisfying ending, a lot of other segments seem to have done so much better. Honestly, I think at this point, the Terror Tales series was trying to focus more on comedy than horror. And while I don't necessarily mind the comedy, it feels like that shift in focus, along with there being more segments here, may have restricted these a bit. Not to mention, gave me more work to do, because I had more segments to talk about, so thanks a lot, Part 5! But hey, if this is the worst they can do, then we're in for a real treat today.
Looking good, Kim. Why, thank you, Mario. That was cool.
Whereas Part 5 segments are more generic horror stories given a regular show twist, Part 4 segments had a style that I think suited this whole series a little better. Horror movie parodies. Because some of this series' best segments feel like horror movies that have been shortened to just the good parts.
Just the good part speeds up all your favorite shows and movies. Just watch.
Well, the segments from this episode aren't exactly all horror movie inspired. The Hole, for example, is more of a Twilight Zone satire. It's about the park being engulfed in a mysterious fog and the park crew raffling off a sacrifice to keep them safe from it. And it's very metaphorical with its writing. It's all used to send a message just like Twilight Zone would do. Which in this case is about not letting something you don't understand cloud your judgments.
Turns out the fog was all in our minds. It was really more of a psychological, existential kind of fog.
I guess you could say the fog represented our fear of the outside world.
What a twist!
Overall, I think it's a fine segment for what it is. But it's not something I can see myself rewatching too many times either. I appreciate how it sets its story up, but I didn't find much of it that entertaining. Unfinished Business is an interesting segment where Benson needs to fire Mordecai and Rigby because they've died and their spirits are now haunting the house. The segment has some decently creative horror scenes, but it also has moments that feel just as cluttered as some of the Part 5 segments. Just look at this scene, for example.
You're fired! Why? Why aren't they gone?
Well, damn, give it more than a millisecond before you just give up on it. But at the end of the day, I still like this segment. It's still got its great imagery, and it's probably one of the more creepier segments from the later half of the series. And fittingly enough, Scary Movie Night makes the best use of horror movie tropes. The segment is all about working in as many stupid and overused cliches it can think of into a coherent story, and it gives great commentary on horror films with the use of this. Like, for example, at one point it focuses on dumb character decisions, and kind of makes fun of how easy it is to make those decisions fit, by making the characters as dumb or as blissfully naive as possible.
Package delivery.
Leave it on the doorstep.
It needs a signature.
Oh, well, in that case.
My name's Wyatt. I'm just here for a haircut.
Why would you come to a mental asylum for a haircut?
Well, my barber told me to meet him here. Made sense at the time.
And every time a new cliche pops up, the way the segment is structured, it never feels lazy or forced. If anything, it feels like a genuine love letter to horror movies. And watching this segment always makes me want to check out some of my favorite horror movies again, so it's honestly a good segment to watch to help me figure out how I want to spend my Halloween. So yeah, let that be a testament to how good the rest of these episodes are to me.
Our friendship will be a butterfly floating on the breeze. Do you want to play too?
Now, of all the ways to end the Terror Tales series, I think this episode did pretty okay. Though I will admit, this is the only episode from the series where I felt like the last segment wasn't the best one. that distinction goes to Fear Planet, which I consider one of the best overall segments from the whole series. It all takes place on a planet that brings your worst fear to life once you think about it. And while not a new idea per se, the atmosphere in this is truly chilling. It's very gloomy and eerie, and there's this chilling theme playing over it that it feels like a place where it would be very easy for you to start thinking about your biggest fear coming to get you.
I mean, the only thing I'm afraid of is sharks anyway, and this place is bone dry.
Huh? What was that?
It's almost like walking into a living nightmare for me. It's a perfect segment to watch on Halloween. And it does have its funny moments, like the whole reason the story was being told in the first place. Personally, I think this would have been a serviceable last segment because it sums up a lot of what made the series so great to me. How great of a horror atmosphere it could create, and how well it could blend that atmosphere with its comedy.
It just popped into my head. My greatest fear, amusement park mascots!
What's up, Doc?
King Size Candy Bars is a fun little vampire segment. I mean, it has its cheap moments, like the vampires, for some reason, keeping garlic products in their house for the characters to use later. But kinda like Scary Movie Night, this episode is trying to work in as many vampire cliches as it can. But even with all those cliches, it still feels unique enough to stand out on its own. Hell, there's even some really clever puns thrown in.
Wait, these aren't king size, they're count size!
Also, it highlights a reason I like having the characters tell their own stories. It allows them to do stuff like this.
What a great haul! People seem to mostly be giving out quinoa, gorp, and toothbrushes. It's not ideal to me, but like Eileen always says, you can't put a price on proper dental hygiene.
Oh, you guys.
Doing that, I think, gives the segment a bit more of a personality. And as for Alien Roommates, I think this one is hurt by the fact that it's the last segment, because it just feels like a generic movie parody that would have been right at home in part 4. It's not bad, it does combine two very different things into a somewhat entertaining story, and it makes me laugh at times.
What kind of activities do you enjoy? Who knew there were so many ways to be unacceptable?
But it doesn't feel like a Terror Tale episode. It feels like a basic, regular show episode that's been shortened up a bit. It's trying to make humor out of having a bad roommate, which already seems to be a popular theme, but here, that's the majority of the episode. And while it has its moments, it's not really anything amazing. And when it does get to the action, it's all in the last minute or so, and it's not really that creative. It just feels like they found an unfinished script from Season 5, changed the main antagonist, and hastily put together the ending. And for this to be the last segment of Terror Tales, it's honestly a bit disappointing. But that being said, while this may not have been its best segment, this episode, for me, still had the best ending. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson in Regular Show in Space to close out Regular Show's best holiday series? Yeah, I'll take that. That's pretty awesome. But obviously, this series hit its peak with its first 3 episodes, so let's take a look at them.
Go long. No, flying disc freestylers.
I'm your worst nightmare.
Part 3 is an interesting episode for me because these segments seem a lot more simplistic. But considering I ranked it this high, I guess that shows how much of an issue it was for me. Killer Bed is a pretty interesting segment because I feel like it should be bland to me. I mean, the idea itself is kinda bland. It's about Rigby's new bed being possessed. That alone sounds like a cutaway joke or something. I mean, how do you turn that into a segment without it feeling a little bit forced?
Seriously, that made my ears sad, bro.
Well, I guess they found a way because I think this is a pretty fun segment. It definitely knows how stupid the idea is, and it's just having a blast exploiting it. It gets creative with how the bed tortures Rigby, it adds suspense even when you know what's coming. In fact, it actually caught me off guard with its ending just because it's so self-aware of how predictable it is, that it actually kinda lowered my expectations. And it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's one of the shorter segments from the whole series, but it really feels like it makes the most of its time. And that's one thing I like about regular show. Even their most basic ideas seem to find ways to land with me. I mean, the segment is just one big joke about how much of a pain in the ass do-it-yourself furniture is. And this was a pretty funny way to portray that.
I could use a little help, guys!
It's just a bed, dude. You sleep in it.
Jacked Up Jack-O-Lantern is every bit as punny as the title suggests. I mean, the main antagonist of this one is a Freddy Krueger parody, and that's the punniest horror movie villain out there.
I hope you like squash.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV.
Now obviously, I don't mind puns here and there, but since that makes up the majority of this segment, it kinda gets less and less funnier the more I rewatch it. And there's not really much more to say about this one, other than it's your typical Nightmare on Elm Street parody. It's all about the main antagonist punishing the main characters, and it doesn't really try to be anything more or less than that. And for me, it did its job pretty well, but I think it's better watched in moderation. Unless you really enjoy puns, then this might end up being your favorite segment. And the final segment, The Previous Owner, is probably the most hilarious segment for me. It's a different take on both the Salem witch trials and Poltergeist. Actually, I think it might be both. Not to mention, it deliberately dates itself.
What's cooking, home skillet? Home skillet? Nobody ever says that anymore.
And yet, it's executed so fluidly because there's still a purpose behind it. The main antagonist is a guy who's basically stuck in the 1980s, yet they have him originate in a Pilgrim timeline and then return 200 years later in the 2010s. So it's a character that's both ahead of his time and behind his time. And it's using that as a vengeful spirit that haunts the house. Like, that description alone is hilarious. And as a result, I think this segment has some of the best quotes.
Hey, yo, get back here, fools! I know where you live!
But yeah, while it didn't hold up as well as the first two, it's still a pretty great episode in its own way.
Benson superstitious, Benson superstitious. He's also very scared. He's shaking in his britches.
Yes, very scared.
For the record, this episode was viewed by 3.1 million viewers when it premiered, making it the most watched premiere in regular show history. And what I really like about this one is that I think every segment deals with a more relatable kind of horror. I mean, yeah, monsters and killers and vampires, those are all nice stories. But nothing really beats the everyday horror that you might never think of. Payback focuses on the horrors of guilt by making Mordecai indirectly responsible for his Uncle Steve's death, with Steve's ghost being a metaphorical representation of Mordecai's guilt that he's trying so desperately to avoid. And visually, I think it's pretty damn chilling, but the humor is also pretty effective.
Rigby, I can't stop seeing my dead uncle.
Me either.
Morty!
And the ending also puts a bit of a twist on the title being Payback, which I found pretty ingenious. Party Bus also focuses on an interesting kind of horror. It's about Mordecai, Rigby, Margaret, and Eileen getting stuck on a party bus that's slowly draining their lives away. And that feels like a message directed to people who waste their early adult lives partying. Because you might just wake up one day and realize you have no earthly idea what you're gonna do with yourself because you spent too much time trying to stay young, not realizing how much time was being taken from you. Which would make this episode both a life lesson, as well as a creative way to call a party bus a waste of time.
You don't look so good, man.
Yeah, how long have you been here?
15 minutes.
I mean, I could be overthinking that, but even then, I still think the idea of your life being drained away is pretty damn terrifying in of itself. And I think this segment paced it pretty well by letting the viewer get a good feel for the atmosphere, before suddenly dropping a race against the clock situation onto the characters.
Mordecai, your face!
What are you saying?
And Wallpaper Man, well, I mean, I'm deathly afraid of spiders, so this is an everyday horror I know all too well. Yeah, okay, I guess this episode isn't necessarily centered on an everyday horror. It's more like an It parody mixed with a warning against trusting certain infomercials. And surprisingly, this episode makes both of those blend together nicely, as the wallpaper focus translates pretty well into the It-styled ending. And the episode presents all of this bit by bit. It's actually pretty well paced. And that trippy-ass chase scene really makes this segment stand out. It's very creative with what the characters run into, and how the walls change. And not to mention, it has some of the Terror Tales series' more quotable lines.
Dude, Muscle Man's package!
What? Muscle Man's package?
Overall, it's just a whole series of impressive episodes that not only pack in a lot of horror and comedy, but even some thought-provoking situations. And I guess like any sequel, it also calls back to a moment made in the first installment.
Yeah, we're fine. Huh? Aw, what? We didn't survive the crash.
Yeah, and speaking of the first episode, I guess there was no real surprise it was gonna be the best.
Who's that guy?
I was just trying to deliver a package to Mitch Sorenstein. I don't want to die!
I guess this episode puts the other 5 more into perspective, because this episode started off with a straight up bang. This is actually one of my personal favorite overall episodes from Season 3. And I'm pretty sure it played a role in Part 2 becoming the most watched premiere. Its first segment, Creepy Doll, it definitely lives up to the name. This is the creepiest thing I've seen from this show. Yeah, trust me, that dummy's got nothing on this doll. That thing would have given me nightmares as a kid, even if all he does is draw on faces. He could be picking flowers while talking with that voice, and I'd still call this the creepiest thing from the show.
Have some tea. What's wrong with you? I don't want your tea. I want to draw on your face.
I mean, this episode is pretty much the regular show version of Child's Play, and it's using that uncanny valley kind of effect with dolls like this to cram in as much suspense and creepiness as it can in just 5 minutes that, honestly, it doesn't even really need that much of a story. It's clear what it's focusing on, and God, it does that job well.
Get this psycho off me!
Get off him!
You're all gonna get drawn on!
Death Metal Crash Pit isn't exactly one of the most impressive segments, but as is custom with most Muscle Man-centered things for me, I still find myself enjoying it, even if it is more ironically. And hell, I do find the ending genuinely funny, which is probably why Part 2 reused it as its send-off.
Best crash pit ever! Huh.
But I do admit, the whole Ghost Band being sucky and all, that's something I can't really rewatch as easily without getting annoyed by. Not saying it's a bad joke, I get it, it's a straight-up mockery of death metal music. It just isn't that funny to me. But hell, I could easily see this making a lot of other people laugh.
Get a cat, or a rat, or a bat, or a hat, or a pat, or a bat, or a mat. Have you ever seen a gun? Oh, this music sucks!
And personally, I wish the rest of these episodes followed the formula this episode followed, and made the last segment practically its own episode as this one does within the house. This is probably my favorite segment from the whole series, just because it takes the idea of Rigby being turned into a house, and makes it one of the most intense segments they've made. The wizard who Rigby ticked off is frickin' horrifying. His motives and what he's doing all make sense. There's even a bit of a lesson thrown in about facing consequences of mischief, even if you think it's not that big of a deal. And this is the segment that blended horror and comedy together perfectly. For example, the fates of each of the characters. What happens to them is terrifying, but most of them are given one-liners to break up the tension, and they're pretty good one-liners.
I told you I was ripped.
Damn, Muscle Man, that's an amazing Colossal Titan costume. Overall, it's the segment that I feel shows off the best of the Terror Tales series.
I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have made your house! Do you hear me? I'm sorry!
But I do admit, it has a bit of an unfair advantage since it's basically its own episode. And if I had to pick a segment I enjoyed that was under 11 minutes, I'd probably go with Fear Planet or Creepy Doll in terms of horror, and maybe the previous owner in terms of comedy. But honestly, I think any of these episodes would be a good thing to watch for Halloween. So whether you're looking for a good scare, a good laugh, something in between, or just an idea of what horror movie to watch, then I don't think you can go wrong with this series. It's an excellent piece of Halloween media, and a great series of segments from an excellent overall show. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.
Happy Halloween.
No way! Is this for real? Very real. In Manti culture, offering food to another is an instant marriage proposal.
Well, shit.
What the hell was that?